It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a call from my best friend, Claire. She sounded rushed, her voice carrying the stress of someone juggling a million things at once. "Hey, listen," she said without the usual small talk. "I need a huge favor. Can you give Daniel a ride home today? I'm stuck at work and I won't be out for at least another 2 hours." For a moment, I hesitated. Daniel, Claire's younger brother, wasn't someone I knew well. I had seen him plenty of times at family dinners, birthday parties, and those casual get-togethers Claire loved to host, but we had never exchanged more than a polite hello and how are you. He was the quiet type, always hanging back in the corner with his headphones in or scrolling on his phone while everyone else mingled. To me, he was just Claire's brother, part of the background, someone I had no reason to think much about. Sure," I finally answered, even though my voice carried a little uncertainty. "Where's he at?" Claire quickly explained that Daniel had just finished his evening class at the community college and was waiting outside near the parking lot. It wasn't far from where I was running errands, so it wasn't exactly inconvenient. Still, I couldn't help but wonder why she asked me, of all people. She had plenty of other friends and family nearby. But Claire had this way of roping me into things without giving me a chance to say no. And I always ended up going along with it. After hanging up, I sat in my car for a moment, staring at the steering wheel and letting out a small sigh. I told myself it would be quick, 10, maybe 15 minutes at most. Just pick him up, drop him off, and be done with it. No big deal. As I drove toward the college, my mind wandered. What would we even talk about? Would it just be an awkwardly silent ride? I tried to picture Daniel in the passenger seat, tall and lanky with that mop of dark hair falling into his eyes, his expression usually unreadable. He always struck me as someone who kept his thoughts locked away, someone with layers no one really bothered to peel back. When I pulled into the lot, I spotted him immediately. He was standing near a lamppost, his backpack slung over one shoulder, looking down at his phone. For a second, he didn't notice me, and I had a fleeting thought of just driving past, pretending I hadn't seen him. But then he looked up and our eyes met. He gave a small nod, the kind of acknowledgement that said, "Yeah, I was told you're picking me up." As he slid into the passenger seat with a polite, "Thanks," I realized how strange the situation felt. It was such a simple favor, yet there was something about the quiet wait in the car that made it feel different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it then, but in that moment, I had no idea that saying yes to Claire's request would lead me to a night I would never forget. The moment Daniel settled into the passenger seat, the air felt heavier than I expected. He closed the door quietly, almost too carefully, and murmured a soft, "Thanks for the ride." His voice was deeper than I remembered, steady but reserved. I gave him a small smile and started the car, telling myself this was nothing more than a quick trip across town. At first, the ride was wrapped in silence. The hum of the engine filled the gap between us, while Daniel kept his eyes fixed on the window, his profile catching the late afternoon light. I cleared my throat, determined to break the awkward quiet. "So, how's school?" I asked, the first safe, generic question that came to mind. He gave a small shrug, not taking his eyes off the passing scenery. "It's fine," I nodded, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "Fine." That was his answer. "Not much to work with, but I tried again. Claire mentioned you've been taking some extra classes. What are you studying?" This time, he glanced at me briefly, almost as if deciding whether to answer. "Graphic design. Thinking about doing freelance work eventually." That caught me off guard. For some reason, I'd never really pictured him as the artistic type. "Oh, really? That's cool. Do you like it?" His lips tugged into the faintest hint of a smile. "Yeah, it's my thing, I guess. Always liked sketching, editing, that sort of stuff." Something in his tone shifted, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. There was passion there, hidden under layers of quiet restraint. I felt my curiosity spark. "Do you ever show anyone your work?" I asked. Daniel shook his head quickly, a soft chuckle escaping him. "Nah, it's not really something I share. Most people wouldn't get it. For the first time, I caught a glimpse of something vulnerable in him. He wasn't just the aloof, quiet kid I'd seen hanging at Claire's house. There was more beneath the surface, something he seemed hesitant to reveal. The conversation slowly loosened after that. He told me about one of his professors who pushed students hard but taught them valuable lessons. He spoke about the frustration of balancing school with part-time work, and then, in a voice quieter than before, he admitted, "Sometimes I just feel like no one really notices me. Like I could disappear and it wouldn't matter." The words lingered in the air, heavy and raw. I didn't know what to say at first. My instinct was to reassure him, but I sensed that what he needed wasn't empty comfort. It was someone to simply listen. So I kept my eyes on the road and let him speak, nodding occasionally, giving space to his honesty. As the city streets blurred past, I realized the silence between us was no longer awkward. It was charged, meaningful. Daniel wasn't just opening up. He was letting me see a side of him no one else seemed to notice, and with each word he shared, my perception of him shifted, piece by piece, into something entirely unexpected. The ride should have been straightforward, a few turns, a stretch of main road, and we'd be pulling into his neighborhood. But just as I flicked on my blinker to make the familiar left toward Claire's house, Daniel's voice broke through the steady hum of the car. "Hey," he said quietly, "do you mind if we take a different route? There's something I want to show you." I blinked, glancing at him. His tone wasn't casual, not the kind of half-hearted suggestion you make to avoid traffic. There was weight in his words, a strange sort of urgency. For a moment I considered brushing it off, telling him I had things to do, that it'd be better to head straight home. But the look in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't defiance or boredom. It was more like a silent plea. "Sure," I found myself saying, surprising even me. "Where to?" He gave vague directions, his voice low as he pointed out turns. The further we drove, the quieter the streets became. Houses grew farther apart, streetlights thinned, and the city noise faded into a hush. I felt a knot form in my chest. This was not the direction I expected. Finally, he told me to pull over near a small wooded area on the edge of town. I parked reluctantly, cutting the engine. The sudden silence was almost too loud. Daniel didn't move right away. He sat there staring at the tree line, his jaw tight as though he was gathering courage. "This is where I used to come a lot," he said finally, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Back when things were hard at home." I didn't interrupt, though 100 questions burned in my mind. Instead, I followed his gaze toward the fading path that cut into the woods. He leaned back against the seat, exhaling slowly. "No one knows about this place. Not Claire, not my parents. It was just mine. When everything got too loud, when I felt like I couldn't breathe, I'd come here, sit under that old tree, sketch in my notebook, or just disappear for a while." His words painted a picture I hadn't expected, a secret world he had carved out for himself, hidden beneath his quiet exterior. And suddenly, the aloofness I had always mistaken for indifference seemed more like self-preservation. I glanced at him, trying to measure the weight of what he had just entrusted me with. It wasn't just a scenic detour, it was a piece of himself he was handing over. The air in the car thickened with unspoken tension. I felt an odd mix of protectiveness and curiosity, my heart beating faster than it should have. This wasn't just a ride anymore. For the first time since Claire asked me that simple favor, I realized something. Daniel didn't want me to drop him off at home. He wanted me to see him, maybe in a way no one else ever had. And as I sat there, parked on the edge of his secret place, I knew this wrong turn was about to change everything. The car sat in stillness, the kind of silence that presses against your skin. Outside, the woods stretched into shadow, branches swaying gently in the fading light. Daniel's gaze stayed fixed on the tree line, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I wondered if I'd made a mistake bringing him here, if I'd somehow crossed into a space that wasn't mine to enter. Then, almost reluctantly, he spoke. "You know how everyone thinks I'm quiet, or that I don't care?" He gave a soft laugh, but it was humorless. It's easier to let them think that. Easier than explaining why. I shifted slightly in my seat, glancing at him. His voice was steady, but there was a tremor beneath it, like someone walking across thin ice. "When I was younger," he continued, "things weren't great at home. Not with my parents, not with Claire. She was older, she had her own world, and I didn't really fit into it. They were busy, distracted, and I felt like I was just there, like background noise in my own house. He paused, his hands fidgeting with the strap of his backpack. I could tell he was trying to keep his composure, but his shoulders had tensed, his jaw clenched. "So I found this place," he said, gesturing toward the trees. "I'd come here after school, sometimes for hours. I'd draw or just sit. It was the only place I felt like I could breathe without someone expecting something from me. But I never told anyone, not even Claire. I didn't think she'd care." Hearing him say that, about Claire, my best friend, hit harder than I expected. I knew she loved him, but clearly there was a whole world between them that I'd never noticed. He looked at me then, his eyes darker in the dim light. "I guess what I'm saying is, I got used to keeping everything to myself. Because when I did open up, on the rare occasions I tried, it felt like no one was really listening. They'd nod, change the subject, or tell me I was being dramatic." My chest tightened. There was so much pain tucked into his words, years of feeling unseen. And now he was telling me, someone who was practically a stranger. "I'm telling you this," he added quietly, "because you asked. You didn't just brush it off. You actually wanted to know." The sincerity in his tone left me stunned. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't try to fill the silence with empty reassurances. Instead, I met his gaze and nodded, letting him see that I was listening. Really listening. For a brief second, something shifted. The walls he had so carefully built cracked just enough for me to glimpse the person behind them. Not just Claire's brother, not just the quiet guy in the corner, but someone carrying weight he had never shared before. And in that moment, the air between us felt charged, fragile, and strangely profound. What I thought was just a simple ride was becoming something far more intimate. A confession, a revelation, a turning point neither of us had planned. The weight of Daniel's words lingered in the air long after he stopped speaking. It felt as though the car itself had absorbed his confession, holding on to the silence that followed. I could hear his steady but uneven breathing, the faint rustle of his fingers tugging at the zipper of his backpack, and the echo of everything he had just revealed. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. A dozen responses formed in my mind, but none seemed right. Comforting him with cliches, "It'll get better," or "You're not alone," felt hollow, even insulting. Instead, I simply let the quiet stretch, hoping he'd feel the sincerity in my presence. Sometimes listening was more powerful than any words. When I finally did speak, my voice came softer than I expected. "I'm sorry you felt that way, Daniel. You deserved more than to be invisible." His eyes flicked toward me, surprise flashing across his face, as though he hadn't expected validation. Then, almost imperceptibly, he relaxed, his shoulders lowering, his grip on his backpack loosening. It was as if the acknowledgement alone gave him permission to breathe, and then something shifted. The tension that had once filled the car didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It wasn't heavy anymore, it was charged. There was a new energy between us, unspoken but undeniable. His guarded demeanor softened, and for the first time I saw a genuine smile tug at the corner of his lips. Not the polite one he gave at family dinners, but a quiet, real smile that reached his eyes. "You know," he said after a pause, "I didn't think I'd ever tell anyone this. I don't know why I'm telling you." "Maybe because you needed to," I replied before I could stop myself. My words hung in the air, more intimate than I intended. Daniel studied me then, his gaze steady, searching. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was intense. I felt a warmth creep up my neck, a flutter in my chest I hadn't prepared for.
Until that moment, he had only ever been Claire's little brother in my mind.
But now, sitting in the soft glow of the dashboard lights, he felt like something entirely different. The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was thick, almost electric, as though both of us were waiting for something to happen, something neither of us could name. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, not out of nerves but to ground myself. Finally, he leaned back in his seat, exhaling. "Thanks for not brushing me off, for listening. It means more than you think." His voice was low, almost intimate, and the gratitude in it settled deep inside me. I gave him a small nod, unable to trust my voice just then. It was in that moment I realized this ride wasn't just about dropping Daniel off. Something had changed between us, subtle but undeniable. The connection we had built in the quiet of that car was fragile, unexpected, and somehow more profound than I could have imagined. And though I couldn't say it out loud, I felt it in every beat of my heart. Daniel was no longer just my friend's brother. He was someone I couldn't stop seeing differently. The drive back to Daniel's house felt nothing like the trip that had brought us here. Earlier, the silence between us had been awkward, a space I felt obligated to fill with small talk. Now that same silence felt alive, buzzing with unspoken words and emotions I didn't fully understand. I kept my eyes on the road, but I was aware of him in a way I hadn't been before, the way his hand rested loosely on his lap, the quiet rhythm of his breathing, the occasional glance he stole in my direction when he thought I wasn't looking. It was subtle, but it stirred something inside me, a pull I hadn't anticipated when I first agreed to this simple favor. As we neared his neighborhood, the lights from familiar houses came into view. I slowed the car, not because I needed to, but because I wasn't ready for the ride to end, and I sensed somehow that he wasn't either. When we finally pulled up in front of his house, he didn't immediately move to unbuckle his seatbelt. Instead, he sat there, staring at the faint glow of the porch light. His expression was thoughtful, conflicted, like he was wrestling with something unsaid. "Thanks again," he said softly after a long pause. "Not just for the ride, for tonight." His words carried more weight than they should have. I turned to him, meeting his gaze, and for the briefest moment it felt like the world outside the car had disappeared. The air was thick with possibility, with things neither of us dared to voice. "You don't have to thank me," I replied, though my voice wavered slightly. "I'm glad you told me. I'm glad I was here." He held my gaze, and in that instant something passed between us, silent but undeniable. It wasn't dramatic or loud, but it was enough to leave my heart racing. Then, with a small smile, he reached for the door handle. "Good night," he murmured. His tone was simple, but the way he said it felt layered, almost like a promise. I watched him walk up the path toward the door, his figure illuminated briefly in the porch light before he disappeared inside. For a long moment, I just sat there in the quiet car, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at the empty seat beside me. My mind replayed everything that had happened. The wrong turn, the confession, the shift in the air between us. I had thought this was just going to be a routine favor, a quick ride across town. Instead, it had left me with a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. I finally exhaled, a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. One simple ride, one unexpected night, and now I couldn't see him, or myself, the same way again. And as I pulled away from the curb, my heart pounding in my chest, only one thought repeated in my mind. What had just happened had left me utterly, completely speechless.